Good morning again, everyone, and welcome. Let us not punish those who are punctual. A few housekeeping requests. If I could ask everyone to please mute and keep your videos off if you're not speaking. And then also, we will be recording this session, or we've started recording this session, and it will be available on our website along with a presentation to everyone who registered. So if you want to have visibility of the presentations that are made today, we will be sharing those with you. Also, we've got plenty of times for questions and answers at the end, so please feel free to pop them in the chat. We also have lots of questions that you shared with us when you registered. Thank you. We will work through some of those and address them in the discussion today. With that, I would like to introduce George McCory. He is our Deputy Chief of Party to introduce the USA Trade Hub. If I could just ask a couple of people to please switch off their videos so that it's not distracting for the audience. Monica and VSLDE in particular, I see you. Thanks, Monica. And George, let me introduce you properly. George is our Deputy Chief of Party. He basically is in charge of running the execution of the USA Trade Hub activities across 9 countries in Southern Africa. He is an expert in the African Growth and Opportunity Act and in trade within the region and with the United States. He holds an MBA in Corporate Strategy, an LLM in International Business Law, and a Master's in Project Management. And a bachelor's in technology and marketing. So we know George brings the legal comment, the marketing comment. He's a very well-rounded gentleman. George, over to you to introduce the USA Trade Hub. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Francis, for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this very important event, webinar, which is aimed at assisting each other understand the food safety management systems and all the other certifications that are aimed to help companies and ourselves, all those that are here, to be able to navigate the certification or management system certification world in order to be able to export to the US. And for those that are from the region to export into South Africa. I'm here to just talk about who we are as the USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub. We are a USAID funded project based in Pretoria, and we operate in 9 countries as outlined in that picture there. Of course, the 9 countries are led by South Africa, and we also in Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, Malawi, and Zambia. Those are the 9 countries in which we operate. We have representation in all those countries. Towards the end of this webinar, we will have an opportunity to share with you contact details of those that are responsible for linking up your businesses with the USAID Southern Africa Trade Investment Hub, so that you can be able to reach out to those country representation or representatives. So if you have any question that you would want to be attended to. So the USAID Southern Africa Trade Investment Hub, USAID Trade Hub in short, it works across those 9 countries that I've just mentioned to increase sustainable economic growth, global export competitiveness, and trade in the region. And we do that through 3 main objectives. So our three main objectives are increasing trade between the 8 countries that I mentioned with South Africa. So we identify firms that need to export or would like to export products into South Africa, and link them up with buyers in South Africa who will be interested in importing products from the region. And you can see why this webinar is very critical, because one of the challenges that companies often face is with meeting market entry requirements, particularly regulations, as well as private standards. So our role is actually to assist or facilitate that, and food certification, particularly for those that would be looking at exporting food into South Africa, is one of the requirements. And the thinking is that South Africa is a big market, so it often requires to import food from the region for local consumption, as well as further processing for export to other parts of the world, especially the US. And this is linked to our second objective, which is looking at working with all the companies or companies in the region, in all the 9 countries we work in, to identify markets or buyers in the US under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, popularly known as AGOA. So we do the similar arrangement, like I highlighted, with firms that will be looking at exporting into South Africa. In this case, we'll be looking at firms that are looking at exporting to the US to take advantage of opportunities offered through the AGOA facility. Again, the issue of market entry requirements, including food certification and regulations, is also very critical. Hopefully, by the end of this exercise, of this webinar, we would have managed to cover some of the critical questions and the processes that are required to ensure that we navigate the market entry requirements. Then the third objective, again, is linked to the 2 objectives that I've just mentioned. And in this case, often we find that the companies will be looking at how they can fund the certification. Of course, there is a cost linked to that, and other funding requirements. And this is where we come in terms of identifying sources of funding to assist the firms that would want to get into deals where they can be assisted with funding to help with all the funding requirements for running a business. So in this case, we do not have the money ourselves. What we do is we play a facilitative role where we identify who would be financiers in South Africa who will be looking at expanding their footprint into the region in terms of working with investees in the region that will be looking for funding, and we link the 2 up so that they can actually discuss that and come up with an agreement in terms of how they can help each other. So our role here is mainly to identify those that will be needing funding, and then we also identify potential investors or funders in South Africa who will be looking at funding these activities. So those are our 3 main objectives. And you can see that the objectives that I've just highlighted are all linked, and also they are quite critical to the subject of our webinar today. That said, I want to allow enough time for us to have this discussion going. and I would like to wish everybody a very productive webinar, and I hope that we will find it worth our while. Thanks very much, and I hand you over back to Francis.
Thank you very much, George.
Francis. Back to you, Francis. Francis, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Okay, I've switched connections. I think we will be okay now. My apologies, everyone. Thank you, George. If I could just remind everyone to please switch off your cameras if you are not speaking, just so that we can have a clean recording and as little distraction as possible for everyone who is watching. Thank you so much. So we have an exciting lineup, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we'll be having a presentation from Famida Khan from SGS, a certification body that is internationally, it's a very large certification body that's very well known. And Famida will introduce SGS briefly during her presentation, but we're in very good hands, and I'll talk more to Famida's experience in a moment. Then we have somebody from Nampak Rigids, Prisha Ruplal, who will be talking about her recent experience of going through a food safety certification process. She's got vast experience from different sectors, and she's going to talk to some of her lessons and what she wished she knew when she went into this that could be useful to companies that are embarking on putting food safety management systems in place and starting to think about going through an audit process. Then we'll have plenty of times for questions and answers at the end of the session. We've got half an hour, which I'm pleased we do, because we have a lot of questions from everyone who registered for this event. I'm also happy to say that Famida's presentation will cover a lot of the questions that were raised, so please do pay attention to her words of wisdom. With that, let me introduce Famida and also Prisha. So Famida is a SHEQ and risk professional. I had to look that up. I'm no expert in this. It's a safety, health, environment, and quality professional. So Famida brings 20 years of experience in terms of working in this field. She's worked across different types of industries and different types of certifications in food, but also in forestry and also on the agricultural side. So she really brings a varied experience across different types of safety and other standards that companies are striving to put in place. She heads up the technical function within SGS in South Africa. And a big thank you to Famida for joining us today. She's got vast knowledge, and I think she's ready to answer questions. She's prepared for us an introductory presentation that really covers some decisions you need to factor in when you're thinking about what kind of safety system you're wanting to put in place, what certification you're going for, what's relevant in different markets. So I think a lot of your questions will be answered through Famida's presentation. Then let me also introduce Prisha. Prisha is with Nampak Rigids, which is a company that focuses on beverage and alcohol manufacturing, yeast manufacturing, personal and home care. And Prisha also has 20 years experience in the quality and standards industry. So she really has related experience that she can share with us, but specifically she'll be giving us a testimonial from a company perspective of what you need to know. So we're in two lovely ladies' hands right now. With that, I will ask Famida to bring up her slides and to come on screen so that we can hear from her. If we could applaud, we would. So there's a virtual applause for you.
Thank you, Francis.
Over to you. Thanks, Famida.
Certification. what emotions does this word evoke in you? Excitement, fear, positivity, or possibly hopelessness? Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today's session has been designed to simplify the certification process, hopefully remove apprehension, and provide some practical tips for your journey to certification. Feel free to ask as many questions as possible, which will be answered at the end of this presentation. As a technical manager at SGS, I would like to give you a short overview of who SGS is. SGS has been in operation for over 140 years and is the world's leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification company, operating globally out of 2,600 offices and laboratories.
Sorry, Hamida, to interrupt you. We don't see your slides, so I just want to make sure that they are up.
They are, and I'm sharing, so I'm not sure.
Maybe just unshare and then let's reshare. Otherwise, we can ask her to bring them up. There we go. If you can just put them in slideshow mode. Perfect. I think it's just adapting. I see the slides, but they're not in slideshow yet.
Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that now.
Murphy's Law.
Okay, there you go.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah, 100%.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. As I was saying, in Africa, there are offices, laboratories, and inspection centers spread over 31 countries, of which 10 carry out food certification activities, with a growing pool of 38 experienced auditors. As previously mentioned, we are involved in certification activities and testing services. We have training academies to provide both public and in-house courses to suit your needs, giving you a competitive edge in the market. International Organization for Standardization, better known as ISO, has published in excess of 21,000 ISO standards. Whilst not all are certifiable standards, there are a large number that are. SGS covers most, if not all, of these certifications. The more popular standards are ISO 9001 for quality management systems, ISO 14001 covering environmental management systems, occupational health and safety under ISO 45001, and of course, ISO 22000. Food certification has really evolved over the years. In addition to ISO, there is the Global Food Safety Initiative, or the GFSI, that emerged. Their purpose was largely to bring together retailers, manufacturers, certifying and regulatory bodies to extend the food safety community and benefit from shared expertise in a global network. The GFSI has a host of food certification programs belonging to independent organizations that are recognized by them. The more popular ones include FSSC 22000, BRCGS, Global GAP, IFS, and SQF. Later in the presentation, we will delve a little deeper into some of these certifications. We will be decoding the uncertainty around certification, taking you through the certification process, and offering a few tips and tricks. Let's start with a few common misbeliefs in industry. The first one we often hear is, certification is for large companies only. This could not be furthest from the truth. SGS has certified many companies with less than 5 employees, and these companies have fared extremely well with their certification process. Certification is to the management system of a company and is not dictated by the size of the organization. The second myth, certification is too expensive. Yes, there may be some capital outlay at the start of the process, depending on the degree of alignment required, but this is actually an investment in your company. The benefits of certification will help you reap the rewards of that investment. Next, a question often asked, is compliance to one standard is a compliance to all standards. Certification is industry specific, hence we talk of ISO 22000 2018 of being ISO 22000 2018 certified and not just ISO certified, which would imply that we are certified to all 21,000 ISO standards, and we know that would be impractical. Food certification in particular covers all industries involved directly and indirectly in the food chain. The fourth point, its benefits only include food manufacturers. So aside from food manufacturers, there are a large number of food packaging companies, transportation companies, storage and distribution facilities, and catering companies that have achieved certification.
Okay.
Foods.
Sorry.
I believe there's somebody who's unmuted.
Yeah, we'll mute them as quickly as we can. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying that aside from food manufacturers, there are a large number of food packaging companies, transportation companies, storage and distribution facilities, and catering companies that have achieved certification. Food certification is also applicable to animal feed producers. And lastly, implementation is too complicated. At face value, it can be, but being equipped with sound knowledge and a decent plan will make giant strides in the right direction. Many of us are acutely aware of the benefits of certification, but struggle with convincing senior management of these benefits. The benefits are many, but I've selected just a few to assist you in presenting your case. One of the most beneficial aspects of certification is the competitive edge it gives your business. These days, the trend is sector specific. For example, if you are in the dairy industry and your competitors have FSSC 22000 certification, the norm would be for all manufacturers in that sector to have equivalent certification. Furthermore, if there are plans to export product, most entry requirements require proof of certification to accompany the export documentation. So it basically speaks for itself. If you cannot open your opportunities, you're limiting the growth potential of your business. Better performance. Part of the ISO standard requirement is risk and opportunity, as well as measurement and monitoring. These are two clauses within the ISO standard that assists in identifying your business's areas of potential as well as improvement. Closely monitoring and tracking results helps with swift corrective action taken before disasters can occur. When we think of food certification, or when we think of food manufacturing, food contamination comes to mind. Food contamination is not just biological related. It could include physical as well as chemical agents. Worst case scenario is product recalls or even withdrawals. And this can be very damaging to the brand. And where lives are affected can have massive financial implications. Furthermore, depending on how your local legislation is scripted, there could be financial penalties and even imprisonment. Resource optimization. The better upskilled the team is, the lower the possibility of errors. Once processes are defined and streamlined, this too allows for optimization. The certification process requires both training and defining of processes. Customer confidence. Achieving stakeholder confidence is a culmination of a number of aspects, but once attained leads to a multitude of opportunities. Being certified adds to this confidence, as is an external body verifying the organization's activities and giving an impartial outcome. And lastly, the ISO standard requires the identification and demonstration of compliance to regulatory requirements. This assists in working toward regulatory compliance and avoiding those unnecessary and unwanted litigation processes. So I've added now a slide covering a few misused words and misunderstood terminology. The very first one is the use of the term accreditation. So very often companies refer to themselves as being accredited or having accreditation to a particular standard. Now, the definition of accreditation is the third-party attestation related to a certification body conveying formal demonstration of its competence to carry out specific conformity assessment tasks. In simpler words, this term applies only to the certification body. In terms of process, and this is a very basic explanation, there are accreditation bodies like SANAS, UCAS, COFRAC, and a host of others. These organizations carry out assessments on certification bodies like SGS to accredit them. This in turn allows certification bodies to carry out certification activities and hence determines whether the certification body can issue an accredited or an unaccredited certificate to its clients. Therefore, certification is the process by which licensed certification bodies provide assurance that a management system and its implementation by the audited organization comply with scheme requirements. This term is to be used by the organization having undergone a successful certification audit. So accreditation, the term accreditation is used by the certification body, and the word certification is to be used by the client that has been certified. In terms of food, food is defined as a substance or ingredient, whether processed, semi-processed, or raw, which is intended for consumption, and this includes drink, chewing gum, and any substance which has been used in the manufacture, preparation, or treatment of food. But it does not include cosmetics or tobacco or substances or ingredients used only as drugs. Furthermore, packaging manufactured for the cosmetics and pharmaceutical industries is not covered by food certifications. So please keep this in mind as we often get requests to include these to the scope of food certification. A non-conformity is the non-fulfillment of a requirement. If you refer to your ISO standard, regardless of the management system, you will see this term being used. The colloquial term is findings. So we all heard of, or we all refer to findings, but the correct term to use is nonconformity. So don't be surprised when an auditor refers to a nonconformity being raised. Classification of nonconformities include minor and major nonconformities, and some schemes may even allow for critical nonconformities. Legislative requirements. Many organizations believe that this is all they need to comply with. Legislative requirements is the minimum mandatory requirement for any food organization, but to ensure food is safe, more is required. So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned there's a large number of certifications available. There was a slide which covered the 9, 14, 45, and a whole host of other certifications. And in particular, with regards to the food certifications. And I know this can become extremely confusing. So the pyramid is a depiction of certification schemes in building block format. The bottom of the pyramid is the most basic programs. This is often referred to as capacity building programs. These capacity building programs include sorry, there's interference there again. So the capacity building programs include your prerequisite programs as well as your GMP and GDP, which is your good manufacturing practices, as well as your good distribution practices. The next year starts moving into certification schemes such as HACCP and ISO 22000. HACCP is the certification of the HACCP system covering your prerequisite programs and HACCP principles. For ISO 22000, it is aligned with the ISO standard that includes HACCP principles in addition to other clauses. So ISO 22 is an internationally recognized certification, but not GFSI benchmarked, and hence it falls into the second tier. At the top of the pyramid are your GFSI benchmark schemes. So that would be your FSSCs, BRCGS, etc. These include all building blocks from tiers 1 and 2, and that will include ISO 22000, your ISO TS technical standards, which is very detailed PRPs and GMPs, as well as additional requirements that the schemes have added on over and above the ISO 22 and ISO TS requirements. Okay, so now that you have a basic understanding of the building blocks, let's get into the actual schemes. So the first block is the GFSI Global Markets Program. This scheme is unaccredited and is not a certification scheme, but rather a program used to assist companies build up towards certification. It has two phases. It includes the basic program, which covers your PRPs and GMPs only. And the second part of the scheme is the intermediate level, which has PRPs, the GMPs, and HACCP added on. Now, the Global Markets Program is not widely used because I think most companies want certification, but there are a large number of companies who probably feel uncertain in terms of how to go about the process and opt for the smaller schemes and, like I said, build up into certification. The first certification scheme is HACCP, which we audit against SANS 10330-2020. It's designed for the food, packaging, and other services industries. Its popularity is diminishing, especially since the termination of Dutch HACCP. However, it is still used as a stepping stone into other certifications. This certification may not be internationally recognized, but it still serves as a good way to have some form of certification before taking your management systems to next levels. ISO 22000 is a globally accepted international standard. It is a framework that combines prerequisite programs, the HACCP principles, and the management system. ISO 22000 has been aligned with ISO 9001 in order to enhance the compatibility of the two standards. So what this means is if you're looking to have integrated management systems, ISO 22000 has been designed to align with the clause structures of all other ISO standards. So you can easily integrate your ISO 22000 management system with any other ISO management system or certification that you have. ISO 22000 can be applied independently of other management system standards or integrated with existing management system requirements. GFSI benchmarked schemes means the scheme meets the highest standards globally, leading to international food industry acceptance. The first one that I have up is the FSSC 22000. FSSC is a certification scheme for food and feed management systems in compliance with ISO 22000 and ISO 9001 requirements. It includes sector-specific prerequisite programs requirements, as well as additional scheme requirements. The FSSC scheme sets out the requirements for certification bodies, accreditation bodies, and training organizations to develop and implement its operations for auditing and certification of food safety management systems of organizations within the entire food supply chain. FSSC 22000 can be audited across numerous industries, notably processing of perishable animal products. These would include industries processing red meats, poultry, fish, dairy, eggs. Processing of perishable plant products, and these could include raw, cooked, chilled, and frozen product. It also covers various other industries, such as your oils and fats, grain and grain products, food packaging, everything from plastic and paper to glass and metal. It covers your storage and distribution industries, as well as your animal feed industries. The audit grading includes minor, majors, and criticals. So in essence, it's a pass or failed audit. BRCGS, the company was founded by retailers who wanted to harmonize food safety standards across the supply chain. They are globally recognized and across both food and non-food categories. The BRCGS, like the FSSC, offers certification in a number of industries, which include food, food packaging, storage and distribution. And this is slightly different to FSSC because they have agents and brokers as well, and a host of others. Now, you're probably wondering what agents and brokers are. So agents are companies that trade between a manufacturer and its customer, but do not have at any point own the goods. So these would typically be your import and export type of businesses. And a broker is a company that purchases or takes legal ownership of the product for resale to manufacturers, other brokers, retailers, but do not sell directly to the customer. So it's almost like a warehousing or a middleman type of concept. These audits have a scoring attached, which results in what we call a graded audit. So at the end of a BRC audit, there will be a percentage outcome, which will ultimately result in you being A graded, B graded, or C graded. HACCP, ISO 22000, and FSSC have certificates that are valid for 3 years, whereas the BRCGS certificates require annual audits to be done. So that certificate is only valid for 1 year, keeping in mind, or that's provided that you scored AA, A, or B grading. If you scored a C grading, you're required to do the audit in 6 months, and anything below a C is then considered a fail. Okay, the certification process can be a rather daunting task, especially with not knowing the industry jargon. One tends to shy away from asking questions. So we experience this very often with a large number of clients, often only communicating with the certification body when their audit is due. How do you get the process of certification off the ground? So firstly, planning is of paramount importance. You need to obtain a copy of the standard. And it still surprises me as to how many companies want to be certified, but have never laid an eye on the copy of the standard. So obtain the copy, read the standard, try and make sense of what the requirements are. Next, you will need to assemble a team. And at this point, don't worry about the competence of the team, but try and include members from all different departments, especially those having an impact on food safety. This could include your maintenance personnel, microbiologists, packaging technologists, operational personnel. Determine the training needs. So earlier I said don't worry about the competence, and that's because we will identify training needs and we will get everybody up to speed in terms of what the requirements are. The training is not just for the food safety team, but for every person at the company, starting with the MD or CEO, all the way to the security at the main entrance. Next, you will need to start the development of the food safety management system. This will include drafting of policies, procedures, process flows, and creating forms for verification activities. You now need to implement these procedures that you've written. And this will entail training and regular reinforcement until everyone understands them and practices them. It's got to become a way of life. There's no minimum or maximum time frame for this. It will be largely dependent on buy-in from the employees, as well as how they adopt the new food safety culture that you've introduced. Through all of this, it's essential to keep testing your system. So you can do this through routine system evaluations. You can pull your management team together where they can all give input and just be critical of your system. Internal audits are crucial and a mandatory requirement of the standard. So after rigorous evaluation, once the outcome of your internal audits are favorable, you can start exploring options and selecting your certification body. So at this point, you can keep 2 to 3 options open to you, and based on what the certification body can offer, you then make your final decision. The process, once you've made contact with your certification body, the CB will require you to provide some essential information in order to prepare a proposal for you. On acceptance of the proposal, the certification body will schedule your audit. The very first audit you undergo is called the initial audit, which is made up of two parts, a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit. Keep in mind, for BRCGS, there is no stage 1 audit. You go straight into the main audit. The purpose of the stage 1 is for the auditor to ascertain if the management system is in existence and robust to continue with the certification process. At this stage, the auditors will raise findings. So unlike earlier on when I spoke of nonconformities, these are findings because you have the option to address them or not. But of course, if you don't address them, they could lead to nonconformities at the stage 2 audit. So once the stage 1 is complete, you will receive an audit report and the list of these findings. The time frame between the stage 1 audit and the stage 2 certification audit cannot exceed 6 months, or you will need to restart the stage 1 audit afresh. So now your stage 2 audit is your actual audit, where your auditor will review your documentation and processes. Any non-conformities arising from this audit is required to be addressed before the certification processes can continue. So once all the information and evidence is submitted by yourselves, the auditor recommends you for certification. But this is not the final step. The audit pack is submitted to the certification body's office, where it undergoes intense certification internal processes. The report undergoes a technical review and thereafter what's called a certification decision process, where the certification reviewer makes the final decision if the company can receive certification or not. If certification has been granted, you will then receive your certificate. Now, keeping in mind the process which I described to you very briefly, you would have guessed that you do not receive a certificate the day after your audit. In fact, you don't even receive it the week after your audit. The entire process can take between 6 to 8 weeks from the last day of your audit to conclude. So if you need a certificate for a specific reason, please do plan ahead. The process cannot be cut short at any point, and unfortunately, it needs to see to the end. So please keep this in mind and plan ahead. Except for BRCGS, which is an annual audit, all certifications are maintained over a 3-year period through your annual surveillance audits. At year 4, the cycle starts afresh with what's called a recertification audit. And this, of course, is also dependent on ensuring all certification rules are adhered to through the course of the cycle. So there are in excess of 130 certification bodies worldwide, each offering various certifications. The figures I have displayed are the number of certificates per scheme. I've included the total number of global certificates as well as how many certificates are issued by SGS. So looking at BRCGS, there's in excess of 21,000 certificates issued worldwide. ISO 22000, keeping in mind that ISO has been around a lot longer than BRCGS and FSSC, they have in excess of 33,000 certificates globally. And just for interest's sake, out of that 33,000, there's about 15,000 certificates in China alone. And from an FSSC point of view, they're just short of 26,000 certificates globally. So looking at these numbers, you can see they're all around similar, in a similar range. And I'm sure it still doesn't give a clear picture of which scheme to select. So there's a general rule of thumb. The first one is consider your customer requirement. Does your customer have a specific need? Sometimes customers would just say to you, they leave it up to you to pick, or they would say minimum requirement is ISO 22000, or they would be then very specific and say, I want BRCGS. And that will help you in making your decision in terms of which certification scheme to select. The other general trend is Europeans select IFS, the British opt for BRCGS, The Americans turned to SQF, with the rest of the world choosing ISO 22000, but giving preference to FSSC because it includes ISO 22000 and is GFSI recognized. So in terms of selecting a certification body, I just said to you that there's over 130 certification bodies worldwide. Now, how do we go about choosing the best one for our business? The first one, and I think one of the most important points to consider, is accreditation. So just as certification bodies will audit your company to verify your processes, the certification bodies themselves are accredited by the central body to ensure they uphold the principles of certification. So this ensures that the audit process is robust, fair, and impartial when we deliver the service. Look at brand recognition. Some of the certification bodies have a highly recognizable brand, which can be attractive and give peace of mind to your client. The next point is the footprint or the reach. If you operate in multiple territories, the coverage of a certification body can be an important consideration. The location of a certification body branch, sorry about that. The location of certification body branch offices can vary. And those who are furthest away from your branches can lead to increased travel costs. Experience. You got to ask the question, is the certification body familiar with the program you want to be certified to? The schemes have detailed rules, and if the CB or the customer do not adhere to them, sanctions can be placed and you could jeopardize your certification. Credibility and reliability. You want peace of mind that the certification body you're using will be able to carry out the work timelessly and in a professional manner, upholding certification and scheme rules. Resource capacity and capability. Don't take it for granted that the auditors used by certification bodies are trained for their jobs. Ask the questions. Know that the auditor you're getting is right for your industry and processes. And lastly, supporting services. It is worth considering when engaging a certification body. Many will provide training and other services that will be beneficial to your organization. Now, having worked at a certification body, we get a lot of questions posed and frequently asked questions. So the first very often asked question is, how often will I be audited? ISO 17021 requires audits to be conducted at least once per calendar year. So that means you'll have an audit once a year. How long is my audit? The certification mandates are calculated in line with Annex B of ISO TS 22003-2013. The calculation factors in the number of HACCP studies, the number of employees, the food sector category, and the presence of a relevant management system. The surveillance audit days are 1/3 of your initial certification mandates, and the recertification is 2/3 of your initial certification mandates, keeping in mind that certain schemes require a minimum number of days for the audit. Will I have the same auditor? You could have the same auditor, but you can also opt not to, and you may request that the auditor be changed. This change may be accommodated based on auditor availability as well as auditor competence. Is the auditor competent in my processes? So the schemes largely define the requirements for an auditor. These would include tertiary qualifications, minimum years of industry experience, and various additional trainings. As part of the practical approval, the auditor is expected to complete observation audits and thereafter will be evaluated and approved by a lead auditor, thereby granting competence and lead auditor status to the auditor. Auditors are also approved per sector code. So that basically means if an auditor has only worked in the meat industry he will not be allowed to audit in the dairy industry, for example, because the lack of understanding of the dairy processes may not be there. So this will ensure that your auditor is competent for your processes. How do I determine if my certificate is valid? So there's two parts to this answer. The first one is you just simply look at the date on the certificate. It will include an expiry date. But second to this, there's various ways that your customer can validate or verify the validity of your certificate. For GFSI schemes, the client's audit information and certificate is expected to be uploaded to the scheme site. So for BRCGS, the BRCGS directly can be used. And for FSSC, you will be able to search on the FSSC website. For all other schemes, the certification body will make the validity of the certificate available on their website. Can I change service provider? Yes, you can. Most certified clients feel that they have to wait the full 3 years with a certification body before making the change, or it will jeopardize their certificate. This is not true. You can move at any stage of your certification cycle, provided your certificate is accredited. So if your certificate is accredited, you will be able to retain your certification history. In the event you have an unaccredited certificate, you can still change service providers, but you will need to start the certification process afresh, and there will be no history that's carried over. How will I know if I have an accredited certificate? So as discussed in earlier slides, certification bodies undergo assessments by accreditation bodies, thus allowing us to issue accredited versus non-accredited certificates. Your certificate will generally have the logo of the certification body as well as the accreditation body. So this could include UCAS, SANIS, DAX, etc. If there is no accreditation logo, it means your certificate is unaccredited. So the general rule for unaccredited certificates will apply to those audits too, but this is not always guaranteed. So let's bring it over to Krisha Ruklal, who will tell us the journey.
Thank you, Famida. Good morning, everybody. Firstly, thank you to USAID and SGS for awarding me the opportunity to share with the audience some of my helpful tips on systems implementation. So when I saw this quote, I thought that it would be the most apt because in my experience of systems implementation, I often found myself asking myself a question, is this the right time to start with systems implementation? Because you're always having operational requirements that takes up priority. But of course, the answer is no, there isn't a right time. You have to start now, and that's the right time. So Famida, if you can change over to the next slide.
She looks like she's stuck. Gert, can you just be on standby to bring up the backup presentation, please? If need be. Famida, if you're there, can you move to the next slide? Thanks. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first question would be where do we start? Which certification do I choose? And like Famida had also mentioned, this is mostly driven by a customer requirement. Most often your customer would indicate to you what type of certification they would need. So then in that case, the task becomes easier and you know what goal you're working towards. So once you've identified the type of certification that you need to implement, the starting point from my experience is training. It's absolutely important to get a good training body and get a good set of training to understand the requirements of the standard. Especially food safety, it can be quite technical. So the more people from your organization you could get to understand the requirements of the standard, the easier the implementation becomes. The next point is using a multidisciplinary team to implement the requirement. That means getting a representative from the different departments, and most often the team would need to be team members that have a strong technical background. What I found useful here in the multidisciplinary team is bringing in the guys that have been in the business for a long time, because they have the history of the business, and you need to understand that history when you're implementing the systems and identifying the risks. You need to understand why things are done the way it is. There is most often a valid reason for the way the process is set out. And it becomes easier when you have those guys on your team, because most often you'll notice the guys that have been in the business for the longest are the guys that give you the hardest time in terms of changing. So they don't want to change the way they do things, because that's the way it's been done for all these years. So bringing them into the multidisciplinary team makes it easier in terms of implementing the changes that needs to be done. And you can also use them to be your influencer. So usually they're the ones that can influence the others that are resistant to the changes. The other tip is set small milestones. Like I said, food safety can be quite technical. And if you're implementing the PRP standards, there's a lot of requirements that you need to implement or check, and lots of processes you need to put in place to make sure that you've implemented these requirements. So set small milestones, it becomes easier to manage, and you know that you are doing a thorough job as you achieve those milestones, and also you don't feel overwhelmed. It's still within your control. The biggest helpful tip for me is keeping things simple. That's the best. It brings less complications into your system, and maybe it's premature now to say this, but for today you'd be implementing FSSC, and in the future you could be implementing an environmental system or a health and safety system. So you'd want to set up your system so that it's simple enough to integrate as your business grows and as your certification requirements increase. It's just going to make it much more easier to integrate those systems in the future. Okay, so we're moving on to advantages. Besides the advantages that we've seen in the previous slides, I wanted to just touch base on some of the advantages that you get to see from an operational point of view. And some of the things that I've experienced is streamlining processes. So when you begin with the implementation of systems, you'll come across a lot of complicated processes, and that's that opportunity that you have to make things simple, to make things easier, and it's an opportunity to work smarter. When you move into doing your risk assessments, one of the good things that comes out of it is error proofing. Okay, so that also will lead into streamlining your process and lead into continual improvement. So those are some of the advantages that I've experienced when implementing systems. So I hope I've managed to settle your minds if you've been feeling very overwhelmed and feeling like systems implementation is quite daunting. Even though that those feelings are completely natural, I still have those feelings every time I have to implement a system. So I hope my tips have managed to settle your mind. And more importantly, I hope I've managed to motivate you on your journey ahead. And yeah, I'd like to just wish you guys good luck and all the best on your implementation. Thanks, Fumida.
Thank you, Prisha and Fumida. Sorry, Fumida, I see you on mute. If you would want to just wrap up, please go for it. While Fumida is doing that, I would like to ask everyone to please pop your questions in the chat. I see we've got one in the chat, and I'll raise it in a moment. And I have several that were raised prior. Fumida, it looks like you're still on mute, so I'm going to just start asking one question from the audience while you're bringing that up. I think there's a theme coming through in some of the questions that were raised by some of the registered participants around what about national standards? So if you're sitting in Zambia, and would that standard be suitable for exporting to South Africa or the US? And how does that fit in with the internationally accredited standards that you've mentioned? So I'll come back to you in a minute. And in the meantime, I'll respond to Temba. Is this presentation available for later study? It is most definitely. We will be sharing the presentation with everyone who registered. Okay. Fumida, I think we've got a small technical challenge, so can I suggest that you jump off the call and then maybe rejoin? Sorry for that. In the meantime, please keep the questions flowing in the chat box, ladies and gents. Or if you'd like to come on screen, you can please raise your hand and you can come on screen. Thanks, Kat. I see you back, Fumida. Let's just do a sound check. Yes,
yeah, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened there. It
No.
went off mode in any case.
So maybe do you want to answer the question around national standards and how they relate to what you've said and whether they are useful in terms of going into the US or South African market if you're sitting in a place like Zambia or Mozambique?
So keep in mind that standards are internationally recognized. So regardless of where you are in the world, it would be recognizable and can be used. And also again, regardless of where you're selling your product to.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you are a Malawian company and the Malawian Bureau of Standards has an international accreditation from FSSC, for example, that would be on par with something that an international certification body could offer in terms of certifications against a specific standard.
Yeah, so in terms of certification bodies, if, let's say, for example, you said FSSC, if there's a multiple number of CBs offering FSSC, the process of conducting those audits would have to be exactly the same because the scheme dictates, it basically lays out the rules and dictates how these things should be done. So yes, whether you're a CB in South Africa or a CB anywhere else in the world, the idea is it should be done exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So I would also want to just add to that if you're a retailer sitting in the US or in South Africa, you would probably find more reassurance from an internationally accredited certification than from one which is not internationally accredited. And this is important because most retailers that we work with to introduce export companies to are very prescriptive in terms of those standards that they would accept. For example, in our engagements with Pick n Pay in South Africa, they've been very clear that there's a minimum requirement in terms of working with them. So that's why it's quite important, just going back to Fumida's earlier slide around ensuring when you're choosing a certification body, what kind of accreditation they have for which standards. I'm going to just jump to the next question in the chat, and then Nuru, I will come to you to give you an opportunity to pose your question. The question from Linda from the Eastern Cape Development Corporation is, are there any specific certifications required if you export seafood and fish products, or if you work in the seafood and fish product sector?
So there's a difference between certification and regulatory compliance. And I know that the fish industry in South Africa is governed in terms of other regulations, which you would need to comply to in any event. But in terms of certification, like I said in my presentation, that the schemes would cover the fish industry under that specific sector code.
Super, that's clear. So maybe a distinction in the regulations or the legislation, but the certification standards would be similar, the same. Nuru, I see your hand. Do you want to come on screen and pose your question? Nuru, we don't hear you.
No.
And, there we go. We hear somebody now. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
I'm to type, no why, but then my question is, okay, so we are interested in partnering with an existing reputable certified facility in South Africa with the prospect of them producing and packaging our sauces on site. Are you able to provide us a list of such so we can get the communication lines going?
And Nuru, what kind of food manufacturing is it?
Chili.
Chilies, okay. Chili sauces or chili?
Chili sauces.
Okay, thanks, Nuru. So the question is, we're interested in working with a certified processing plant to manufacture chili sauces in South Africa. Is there a list available of certified processors? Thanks, Fumida.
Hello, Nuru. So you may have, if you're paying attention through the full presentation, I mentioned in between that the different schemes have, or sort of give you access to the different companies. So if you go to BRCGS, the directory, you'd be able to search for companies that are certified with that particular products, and the same with FSSC. So if you go to the FSSC website and put in your search parameters, it will pull up the list of all companies certified to that scheme.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nuru. Okay, we have another question around tobacco and the fact that it touches your mouth. So it seems strange that it wouldn't, or it's more of a comment than a question. So I think we can jump over that. Is there any difference between food safety and food security?
Yes. So in terms of food safety, and that's probably what we largely know, that would encompass your entire certification process. And food security, when we look at, I'll use the abbreviations of VASIP and TACIP, which is your vulnerability and threat assessments. That is add-ons or specific clauses within the certification process. So safety would be like all-encompassing, and security is focusing on those elements.
Okay, thanks very much, Fumida. Then what is the Better Food Safety Certification to export to the US market? ISO 22000, FSSC 22000, or BRCG? Yes.
So the safer options are always the GFSI benchmark schemes. I do know that the US market is very prescriptive in terms of what they require. They often also require FSMA. And in that case, you would have to look at what your customer requirement is and what your, so if you are exporting and they would be importing, so what those export-import requirements are before you make a decision in terms of selecting your scheme.
Thank you. There were some questions around the Food Safety Modernisation Act, or FSMA, that you just touched on now. I think it's not specifically the focus of this webinar, but if you are considering exporting to the US, it is an important area that needs to get attention. We do have a specific presentation on that on our website, and Cosmos will share that information with you later. So if you've got questions on FSMA, please reach out to your USA Trade Hub representative as well. And also, if you've got questions in terms of GFSI standards, you can go and look at the MyGFSI website. I think for me, it's mygfsi.com. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
And then you can also go to the individual scheme websites. They will give you a lot more detail from there.
Okay, super. Then I've got a question from Matilda. She says, is the audit done on the factory as well as the food? Brian, I see your hand. I'll come to you in a minute.
So the audit is actually done to the management system, which is your policies and procedures, and to the processes. So it's not a product certification, but rather a management system certification. And I know it sounds a little confusing because in order to see the process, the product has to be in production. But the idea is to evaluate the process that will result in safe food.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that's a clear explanation. It's a bit of we get that often, and it's one of those very tricky ones to answer.
So if we make it very simple, if somebody is making a chocolate, it would require that the people involved in that have got their hair covered, they're wearing
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
100%. So all the controls you would have in place to ensure that product is safe.
Super, thanks. All right, Brian, please come onto screen or unmute and please pose your question. And Nuru, unless that's a new hand, could you please lower it? Thank you. Brian? Okay, we don't hear you, Brian. We see you.
Oh.
Yes, we hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to find out, looking at the different certification preferences in different regions, if you are a supplier to many different regions, does it mean that you need to have different certifications to satisfy the market's requirement in those different regions?
Hello, Ryan. No, but you may need to motivate to your different customers why it's not necessary. So if you have a GFSI benchmark scheme, in theory, because, for example, FSSC, BRCGS, IFS are all recognized by the GFSI, you just need to have one. So if you, for example, have FSSC certification and the client is requesting you to have BRCGS, you can then just basically say to them, but they're all GFSI benchmarked, it's all recognized almost exactly the same, so there is no need for that. The GFSI schemes also encompass ISO 22000, so if anybody is asking you for a separate ISO 22000 certificate, you're already covered under your GFSI certification.
Okay, thank you. I think that satisfies me. So the key benchmark is the GFSI requirement.
That seems to be the trend going forward, yes.
Mm-hmm. So you'll find that there's no exact answer on this question because each buyer could have a specific standard, but there's an attempt to harmonize these and to have standards which are generally at the same level, and that's what GFSI attempts to do, and where the trend is going in terms of what retailers are looking for in management systems.
So having said that, there are a few clients that we have where their clients in Europe are very rigid in terms of what they want. So where they would have, for example, FSSC certification, the client wants, for example, IFS certification. And in a case like that, where the customer does not want to budge on their requirement, those clients do have 2 certifications.
Mm.
But of
Thanks.
course, it's again not the norm. It is the exception, though.
Thanks, Famida.
Thank you.
You answered right? Great, good. Thank you. All right, we've got a similar question from Amanda, and I think it's a follow-up to the earlier one around can I export to the US market with ISO 22000 certification? Can we still follow the national certification standard, even if the certification will be from another internationally recognized service? So I think I'm hoping, Amanda, that the discussion with Brian confirms the point, which is that each buyer could have a specific standard that they require. Generally, the trend is toward a GFSI recognized standard, which ISO is not. Is that based on your presentation, Famida? Am I correct?
Yeah, ISO is not GFSI.
Okay, thanks.
Recognized.
Okay. Good. Then we have another question. Is HACCP approved by GFSI?
No, it's not.
It's not, yeah. If you remember the pyramid in Famida's presentation, it was in the second layer. Famida, is it a good step for companies who are putting a management system into place to take? Should they go, if they haven't had a management system in place and they're introducing something new, or they're embarking on this, should they adopt a phased process of doing HACCP and then another standard? Or what do you recommend in terms of a progression along different types of schemes?
I think it's entirely up to the organization themselves. So HACCP is a little bit left-wing, let's call it that. So if you have a HACCP certification and you want to upgrade from or you want to change your certification, you can't upgrade from a SANS HACCP into any of the other schemes. So that means if you're going to change certification, you start with an issue 1 certificate, which means a brand new certificate. Whereas if you have an ISO 22000 certificate, because it's internationally recognized, we can do an upgrade into an FSSC or a GFSI benchmark scheme. So that would mean your certificate continues. And that's now getting into a little bit of technicalities. I don't want to go too much into that. It becomes a bit confusing. But it's not. But if you really are uncertain, and if you feel that you're investing money in a certification, and if you feel that you're not going to meet the requirements of the bigger schemes, yes, you can start with HACCP. You can maybe start with HACCP, get the feel of what certification is about, what the processes entail. The staff involvement will be there because now they're engaging through this audit, and you start building it up from there. And again, it's all up to you as an organization in terms of what your needs are. There's some companies that's been on HACCP certification and they're happy to stay there. It works for them. And that's what they do. And then there's others, we've had others who do the whole migration process, and those that just go straight for the FSSC BRCGS certification. So sorry, not a very clear answer, but again, it is very organizational specific.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. I think you've definitely enlightened me. Then we've got another question. I think you spoke at different points in your presentation on the value chain and how different entities within that value chain could require certification. So there's a question here: do you need a certificate if somebody's a food broker? I guess that's an agent, Litlogonolo, is that correct? Agent.
Yeah, so we discussed agent and brokers under the BRCGS certification. The FSSC does not include that in there as part of their scope. So if you are a broker or agent, the easiest option is BRCGS.
Super, thanks. I think that's very clear. Then I saw a question, I can't remember if it was in the chat or from the pre-questions around training, and where can companies who want to embark on this go for training? Do you have any suggestions?
Of course, SGS. But no, there's a large number of certification bodies that offer training, but there's also independent companies that offer training. Depending where you're based, you can probably just do a Google search for training organizations that offer what you require.
Mm-hmm. And would it be advisable for companies who choose such training entities to just do a bit of research in terms of their reputation with certification bodies?
I don't even think it's needed to check from a certification body. I think if you're investing the money, know that the certificate you're getting out of that training holds water. You know, again, training also has its own processes. In South Africa, we refer to CETA recognized, so there's NQF levels within the certificate. There's certain courses that could be registered with IRCA, like your lead auditing training that you require, that you do. So depending on what you need, again, you know, the intensity of the training, it could be basic awareness training, and then there's no real NQF levels to it, or you could have more structured training that leads into other type of qualifications. But yes, your training provider must be reputable. And again, just for your own peace of mind, you know, you don't want to pick a, let's call it a fly-by-night type of training provider.
Okay, great. I'm running short on time, and we've still got quite a few specific questions, like, is it safe to use wax to seal jars of jams?
I think, so I think you firstly need to know your product. I think you need to know the properties of your product. And when I say properties, things like the pH, things like water activity, things like what are, and obviously that affects your microbial contamination. You would then need to know in terms of wax, how would that assist in sort of protecting the integrity of the product, and make your decision from there.
So there's some science in all of this that's required, and which goes beyond the certification body's role in terms of determining that, and which would probably require some testing as well, I'm sure. Okay, I'm afraid we are out of time, but I do think we covered the majority of the questions that have come up in the chat box, as well as the pre-questions we received. I would like to thank Fumito and Prisha for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. I've personally learned a lot through both of you. So thank you for your time and preparation and your patience with us. What I will do now is I would like to introduce you all to Cosmas Mamunzi. He's going to wrap up the session today with a few pointers in terms of some resources that we have available and just some next steps. Cos is my peer at the USA Trade Hub. He is the portfolio manager at South Africa. He's a professional with years of experience in trade and economic growth, and very, very well versed in AGOA and exporting to the United States and some of the requirements in that, and in food safety systems. So with that, Cos, if I could invite you to join me on stage and to wrap things up for us. Thank you again, ladies, for sharing so much information. Over to you, Cos.
Thank you very much, Francis, and again, good morning, everyone. This has been a very informative session. Listening from the terraces, we had experts in the house. I know that I noticed that there are some questions that still come that are still coming through. Those will be attended to. If we can move to the next slide, please. Right. So yeah. So the questions will be attended to, and also in terms of the presentations, this particular session and previous sessions, they are available on our website, SATHub. The today's session, obviously, you need to give us a bit of time to make sure it's uploaded, but will be made available, and the presentations as well, the slides from the presenters, from the experts, will be made available. Next slide. We have got events that are upcoming, and we've got some with the dates that are firmed up. For example, the one with ECDC, that will also be looking at market entry requirements, as well as e-commerce. So this one is organized by the Eastern Cape Development Corporation in partnership with USA Trade Hub. It's happening on July 14th. Then we've got a cosmetics sector market intelligence and linkages session. We had one previously focusing on certification, but this is moving a gear up, looking at the US market. So once the dates are firmed up, you'll be notified. We've got annual exporter awards that are taking place in the region. So the next award is taking place in Malawi on July the 22nd, and that will be followed by one to take place in Namibia on August the 5th. Others that are coming up, you'll be notified as well. This will culminate in a regional award that will take place at a date still to be advised. Right, so for more information about USA Trade Hub, you've got in each of these countries, we've got country teams headed by country representatives. What we do not have at this moment is Angola, but Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Zambia. We have got country teams. Please reach out to them for more information. So allow me to thank the experts from SGS FAMIDA and Prisha from NAMPAC for such a packed presentation, packed, very practical, very informative. Thank you very much. We heard what you said, that one, we have to keep it simple, and also we must take bite-sized milestones. We'll get there. Thank you. Also to thank my colleagues, George and Francis, and those behind the scenes who worked towards this session to make sure that it happens. Thank you very much. Also allow me to thank the participants. It's very important that we realize more exports from the region. It's very important that we've got export-ready firms. Some of these, the issues that the experts were discussing, really some of the challenges that we face when we try to export, when exporters want to do South Africa or the US. So it's very important to be knowledgeable, to understand what are the requirements. Having said that, thank you very much. Just closing the session. Enjoy the rest of your day, and meet you next time when we've got similar sessions. Thank you very much.